But you have all kinds of instances of the Bible, fulfilled prophecy, the reference to the undersea vents in Job that we really didn't discover until the 18th, I want to say it's the 19th or 20th century.
Retrofitted nonsense truly fails to impress at all. What about the claim that the moon is a light source, when really it is a reflective object? Some awfully vague quote in Job chapter 28 about entering the springs of the seas does not mean hydrothermal vents. A spring, in biblical time and in today's language, is the source of origin. God is asking whether Job has visited the origins of seawater, which in verse 8 he claims to have stopped leaking too much water. The scientific sources of oceans are rivers and precipitation. Water does not fall off the flat earth to be replaced by underwater springs at the bottom of the ocean.
And this idea of an afterlife, and that kind of scares people too, because if there was no God and there was no afterlife and there was nothing after this, then morals would just be kind of objective. But at the same time, atheists and scientists and things like that, the people at least that I talk to, say that morality is something that we consensually agree on as a society. But they also, reject the fact that 90% of people in the world believe in the existence of God. So it's kind of a double standard to say that morality is a consensual thing, but the existence of God is not.
The existence of a God is an objective question of ontology. Does X exist? He either does or he does not. Morality and the field of ethics is a hotly contended and discussed to this day, ergo you are just making stuff up. But the fact is that you have not gone into or shown signs that you wish to go on into any discussion to prove the existence of your deity. Originally, I was just going to quit here and let my subscribers decide on whether the rest of your video was worth doing. But I don't want to give you the satisfaction of saying rather nonsensical stuff unchallenged. So you know what? Let the games continue.
Because evil is not the the absence of God in this world. It's the absence of God within our lives, and that's the biggest difference between what we view and what we believe in. Because faith exists in everything. Everybody has faith in something. It's not really anything that's really escapable.
I have no faith. At least not in the sense that you mean, i.e. the belief held in the absence of justifiable reason. I have trust, the predictive model based off experience. In relationships, the two are synonymous, but when it comes to science and religion, they are opposites.
Because morality, without God, would in fact be objective. There would be no standard. There would be no nothing to really live our lives based on. Our natural tendencies are to do things that are pretty catastrophic. I mean, when you get angry, you want to do something about it. When you get sad, you kind of lose all your hope and everything, and really everything that you live your life on. When you want to have sex, you do it. When you want to, when these crazy rapist guys, when they want to rape a girl, when they want to have their nut, as you call it, they get it. So a lot of these natural tendencies for people that really want what they want, it wouldn't exist without this moral standard.
And that's why the Bible orders a woman who is unpledged and then raped to marry her rapist. Deuteronomy chapter 22, verses 28 through 29. Because that's your objective standard. Fact is that my life isn't void of hope, of love, of empathy and ethics. Ethics, if God existed, would not exist themselves. There'd be God's word and there'd be no need for ethics. That is objectively false, ergo ethics exists, and God's supposed morality is generally messed up.
And really, observing God's moral standard kind of puts, the puzzle pieces together on what our society should look like and why our society has fallen in a way that it has. Talking about abortion and, with marriage and everything, because, people have the wrong idea. When I have sex, I'm having sex with that one girl who I have, who I've fallen in love with, and I'm okay with parenting because, with sex, it's that pleasurable act, but it's also coupled with the understanding and the responsibility of parenting and saying, hey, this act is going to, result in the reproductive process and I could end up having a kid, so I need to be okay with that person. That's why we save ourselves from marriage and we don't just have sex with every person. And, it kind of takes away, the sacredness of sex to use protection and things like that and try to prevent, pregnancy when that was what it was intended for this entire time. But we've become okay with that. We've taken that moral standard and we've kind of, twisted it in our own certain way, and that's our human standard. That's our human way of looking at things, and those have dire consequences. What are we teaching our kids? What are we teaching the next generations?
Actually, it's our biological standard. You see, other apes, other mammals, and in fact the entire animal kingdom is so vastly successful in conception rates when compared to humanity. We suck at it. Why? Sex has evolved as more than merely a biological mechanism of multiplying genetic material. It has become integrated into social relations. You take such a hopeless view on sex. I take it as it is. An act that unifies two people, allowing them to express their most intimate and exposed nature as a sign of their emotional bonds, whether they be short or long-lived. If God did design sex purely for procreation, he did a damned terrible job.
But also part of being a Christian is accepting society's going to do what they're going to do. You exist within society and you live according to what your life and what the Bible tells you to.
So you force raped unmarried women to marry their rapist, you slay the hostages of conquered nations, save the virgin girls who are now your sex slaves, talking of which you allow slavery, including ownership forever and slave beating. Are you sure you want to claim this to be your objective standard of behavior?
And based on abortion as well, and that's part of the moral fabric kind of decaying, is because we've taken that burden of pregnancy and of kids and have just gotten rid of them in a very barbaric, nasty way of just cutting up a fetus inside of a woman's body when there's no proof at all that fetus is not human. That kind of takes me back to the whole idea of God existence. If how can you prove that a baby is not a human when it's physically there and breathing and having a heartbeat and developing those cells in the brain and developing those things? What makes that baby not human and make you human? How can you?
Rather simple. It lacks viability, lacks a nervous system beyond that of low-level crustaceans, and lacks all physical requirements for any form of cognitive functioning. Any at all, i.e. the thought process required for identity and self-awareness. Also, even if I gave you the unfounded assertion that it's a human any more than an arm is a human, you are not asking for human rights. You are asking for more than human rights. A doctor cannot go up and cut up a patient against their consent to save a child, nor can they attach them to a non-consenting individual. So you fail to get to the human stage whilst I stand with actual evidence, and then you fail to explain why a fetus should have rights beyond that of a living, breathing, conscious child.
How can you prove God doesn't exist when this moral standard is what keeps us going and morals aren't objective? And when we adhere to this moral standard that society is actually more utopian than you'd ever really imagine, those are the things that make sense to me and point to the existence of God.
Holy shit! An actual argument. Too bad that the entire course of history simply screams out bloody bollocks. The laws of the Bible and many other scriptures are tyrannical, apathetic, dystopian laws that keep humanity ignorant and trapped. That is why secular nations like those in Scandinavia fare so well compared to America, which has suffered from the vile strangling of religion.
Because even people like Richard Dawkins, the more he discusses religion, the more he discusses morality of the why we're here instead of just what made us here. He starts asking those questions that he thought was silly of why we're here, what makes us do what we do, why are morals so different than our natural makeup, and it's because love exists, and it's because evil exists, and it's because these things are self-evident.
We know love exists, being a term used to describe emotions and actions with physical basis. They're observable. Evil exists as an abstract based off subjective perspective. A Christian who believes that the Bible is the ultimate authority would not perceive infanticide or slavery as evil. I, as a humanist who views all human harm as evil, would see it as such.
Because Jesus, when he died, he gave us the gift of the Holy Spirit who intercedes with us and creates that link between us and God and makes it evident and holds us more to that moral standard. Not because he's an overlord, but because he loves us. I mean, there's plenty of examples of God's love, going away from the many to find one. The fact that he loves you so much that no matter what you've done, your faith is what, includes you in that promise. Not just saves you, but includes you in that promise, that love, that sheltering faith inward of what we feel and what we experience on the outside.
Hey buddy, threatening people with torture to get them to do what you want, then letting them off if they do, is not love. Anyone who thinks so is fundamentally twisted. That's called abuse where I come from.
Because bad things are going to happen. People are always on the outside going to make choices that affect our lives in a negative way, but because that free will exists, we cannot be protected from other people's choices here, but we can be protected from those choices inwardly and after we die because we have faith in God, and because we understand the temporary nature of what's going on around us. We understand the temporary nature of our sufferings, and that's kind of what puts the pieces of the puzzle together.
Tell me, if a person is going to rape another person, that person who is being raped will lose their free will, whilst the person who is doing the raping will retain it. If God intervened, it would be the person who would have been raped that would keep their free will, whilst the person who would have raped would lose it. By standing back and allowing the person to be raped, God is thus apparently siding with the free will of the rapist over the free will of the raped.
God doesn't get rid of evil because that would separate his people from not his people.
Which is exactly what you guys claim he is going to do anyway, just after the people have been raped, murdered, tortured, starved, etc. Because he's an all-loving God who already knows who will pass and who will fail, yet runs the sadistic games anyway.
And that was kind of a paradox of him saying that he will make his people who are not his people, the original people that were promised, all these things, through the line of Abraham. But we are included in that promise with our faith in him, through our understanding of that moral standard and believing in Jesus' moral standard and what he did when he died on the cross. So that itself, to me, is self-evident of God's existence. Now, whether or not you believe that the Bible is actually true and whether it's withstood the test of time, that's a different story. But I just challenge you to read the Bible, and I challenge you to read this book It's by Rice Brooks, Broocks, and it kind of gives it, in a better perspective of moral and God's existence in general, because it is self-evident, because of everything that's going on around us. And I hope I didn't leave anything out, but I'd like to see a response so I can make another one.
Read the Bible twice, once as a believer, once as a non-believer. Attempted a third time, gave up. You have failed in your task. The task was not to talk absolute bollocks for an hour or for 20 minutes. It was to give your best arguments for God. Your argument amounts to, God exists because I think he exists. So what? I think you are wrong. You haven't displayed any objective evidence or argumentation to convince me on the existence of God. And that, my friend, is why you have failed. That's just the way the dice roll. So, I hope everyone is doing well. Take care. This is Peter Thurston, out.